Today, we are going to start with a new chapter, that is liability for misstatements under tort law. In this particular topic, we will study the liability of a person that arises as a result of making fraudulent statement or false statement that are made by him, and there are consequences that come as a result of making such false statements. So there are three basically different ways by which liability arises as a result of making these statements. First is liability for deceit or fraud. Here the person knowingly makes a false statement of fact, and as a result of it, the other person suffers some kind of loss by acting on that particular statement. So that results in liability for deceit or fraud. Here the person makes that statement knowingly. He knows the very fact that the statement that he is making is of false nature. The second category is liability for negligent misstatements. Here basically the person makes a statement honestly. He believes it to be true for that very moment when he makes that statement, but he is negligent in determining, there is no duty of care in determining whether that statement is false or true, whether that statement is correct or not. He has not taken that, put in that effort to determine whether that statement is wrong or right. He has honestly made that statement at that point of time. However, he should have uh, with carefully he could have determined that particular statement. So in that case also liability arises. The third category is liability for innocent misrepresentations. Here innocently you make a misrepresentations. You are not at all aware at first stage or at later point of stage about the misrepresentation that you are making, or wrongful facts that you are portraying to someone else. First, talking about the deceit or fraud and how liability arises as a result of it. So basically here the person, like I've already mentioned, here the person willfully makes a false statement. Here the person has an preconceived knowledge about the false statement of facts. The second part is that there is an intention also present to actually cause loss to the other person or make the other person to act upon it, and as a result of it the other person has acted upon that particular statement and suffered some kind of loss. And if this certain thing happens, then this particular whole act is actionable when the other person suffers damage. So here it says that until unless the other person, the plaintiff, suffers damage and has not acted upon, there must be some kind of damage that other person has suffered, then only this particular liability arises. Just like I have made a fraudulent statement in order to cause some loss to you, if you act upon my statement, but you have not, you have heard my statement, you have agreed with my statement, but you have not acted upon it, and thereby you have not also suffered any loss, you cannot file against me saying that I have made a fraudulent statement. Only when you have suffered some kind of loss, then only you can file for liability. I mean, you can make me liable for that particular deceit or fraud. So looking forward into essentials of bringing an action for deceit. First is that the defendant has made a particular kind of false statement or false representation he has made. The second part is that he knew about that the particular false statement, the statement to be false. He knew about this particular fact, and also he honestly did not believe it to be true. So in both the ways, either I knew it that it is a fraudulent statement, it is a false statement, and it will result into fraud if the other person acts upon it. And another way round also, that I did not honestly believe it to be true. So it actually means that I know it that it is not a true statement, and even after that, knowing that, I am making that particular statement. Then statement is made with an intention to deceive, intention to cause fraud to the other person, and then the plaintiff, by acting on my particular false statement, he has suffered some kind of loss as a result of that statement, by acting on that particular statement. So these are the essentials wherein knowledge and intention play a vital role. First, first move forward with the first essential of deceit or fraud. First is false statement of fact. So here basically it means that there must be some kind of false statement of fact that is made to the defendant. I mean, that is made by the defendant to the plaintiff. If he is making a true statement at that point of time, and it is a true statement, and you have acted on it and you have suffered some loss, by acting upon that particular statement. You cannot file for this particular tort, because here it requires a false statement of fact that is required. And also here it says that fraud is not committed by making a true statement. Now the main general rule of fraudulent statements basically says, even you can study this in contract law, section 17, wherein it talks about fraud. Here the general rule says that mere silence or non-disclosure of truth does not amount to fraud. So the general rule says that if I keep quiet about, suppose I'm a seller, I'm selling some kind of defective goods. If you as a buyer have not asked about the defects, then mere silence does not amount, my mere silence does not amount to fraud. Also, if I am, again it says non-disclosure of truth, which means that I'm not revealing the actual truth, but I'm just remaining silent, so it does not amount to fraud. That is what the general rule says. Here we have a case, Sri Krishna versus Kurukshetra University, wherein Sri Krishna was a candidate for the LLB, and he has to give a certain kind of exam, and some exam, and like every college has a minimum requirement of attendance, here also minimum attendance was required, and he was not coming up to the required attendance. However, when the examination form has to be filled, you have to mention about all of these things. He did not mention this fact in the admission form. Also, there was the head of the department, the examination head, the examination center, the people who are engaged in all these activities, they have also not scrutinized his particular application, and they have let him sit in the examination. So here it was held by the Supreme Court that here there was no fraud that was done by the candidate, because here they are applying the general rule, that is mere silence does not amount to fraud, and the university will not have any power to withdraw his examination form on that particular ground. So here it says, here the main general rule has been applied in this particular case, and they have said that since there is a fault on your own part, his silence will not amount to fraud. If you would have asked him about, or about scrutinize that particular application, and he would have still kept silent, then that amounts to fraud. The university should play their part first, and then like they can ask for further details. So here the general rule has been applied. Now there are 4 exceptions to this particular general rule. The general rule, as you remember, it says mere silence does not amount to fraud, but there are 4 exceptions where even if you keep silent, then also it amounts to fraud. There are certain matters, subject matters, where you cannot remain silent. First is when there is a duty to speak, then in that case you cannot remain silent. So here it says that if you are deliberately keeping silent in certain matters which they have mentioned, that where it is essential, very much required, prerequisite, that you have to completely state the facts in good faith. So in that case, your silence amounts to fraud. Like contracts of insurance are contracts which are done of utmost good faith. So all the insurance contract that is formulated, the certificate that is given at the end, it requires that you must disclose all the material facts for the contract of insurance. And if you are choosing to withhold some kind of information, then it would amount to fraud. If you are trying to suppress any kind of information, then that particular true statement, and if you are suppressing that information, that it is equivalent to false statement. So here, when you have a duty to disclose, then in that case, your silence amounts to fraud. Here, there is a famous case with regard to, even that is, like I have already mentioned, insurance matters. Then again, marriage matters. So in the matter of marriage, the fact of unsoundness of mind of a party demands a duty to disclose that particular fact to the other party who is getting engaged with you. So when here in this particular case, the appellant Kiran Bala, they hear she was a divorced person, woman. Her earlier marriage was annulled because on the ground of her unsoundness of mind. Later on, after her marriage annulment, she again remarried BP Srivastava. However, she did not disclose this particular fact of earlier marriage being annulled on the ground of unsoundness of mind. She has not disclosed all of these things to the second person whom she was getting married. So here the consent that was obtained, the consent for marriage that was obtained from BP Srivastava was obtained on the ground of fraud. Here it says that she remained silent in matters of marriage. There is a duty to speak. You cannot remain silent. So here, whatever, if you're trying to keep silent in that case, it is in this situation, it is a duty of the girl or her parents to disclose the fact at the time of second marriage. And in that case, she was held liable for fraud. The second exception wherein it means that even if you're keeping silent, that amounts to fraud. Second is if a person makes a statement believing the same to be true but subsequently discovers it to be false, then he has a duty to correct that particular statement. So earlier when I made that particular statement, I knew it to be true, so I have made that particular statement so that you can act upon that particular statement. But later on, consequently, gradually, you have discovered, I have discovered that that particular statement is no more true. It has become false subsequently. So therein again a duty to disclose the truth arises. If I am not correcting that particular statement and clearing it, that particular fact to the plaintiff, then the plaintiff, if acts upon my earlier statement and suffers loss, then I will be liable for that particular fraud. Third is when you are speaking only half truth, then it may be considered to be fraud. In this case, it says that when the whole you know about the whole facts, a whole matter, but half of the things you are mentioning which are true in the sense true in nature, you are mentioning it to the other party, but the rest of the facts which you know it to be false, you are not disclosing it. But if the other person acts upon that half true statement, and as a result of that he suffers loss because he does not know the rest of the matters, the secret matters, the confidential matters which are of fraudulent nature, or which might cause loss to the other person. If he acts upon it, he might be able to determine it clearly. So therefore I am making that particular statement half truth, I'm just disclosing so that other person acts upon it and I get some kind of benefit out of it. So in that case also I'll be liable for fraud. And the fourth exception says that active concealment of defects means a false statement which is made regarding the defects, and the particular defects, I mean the information regarding the defects, I'm not revealing it, I'm concealing that particular information. So in that case, if the defect in the goods, suppose says I am selling a particular pen, so in that case, if you can by your naked eyes, if a particular consumer can actually determine what kind of defect is there in that particular good, so in that case I can remain silent, because here let the buyer be aware. But in case if there is some kind of defect which a buyer will not be able to detect, so it therein if I remain silent, then in that case it is considered that I have a duty to speak about the defect. And if I remain silent, then I have chosen that I'll be liable for fraud if there is some kind of loss that is suffered by the other party. Moving ahead with the case laws for liability for deceit or fraud, first we will deal with Ward versus Hobbs. In this particular case, the seller here, he knew the one, we'll consider two parties, seller and buyer. So seller, he knew that the pigs, that he was a seller of pigs, that the pigs that he was selling were suffering from typhoid fever. He did not disclose this particular fact to the buyer. However, he mentioned this particular statement that pigs were sold with all faults, with all defaults, we can say. So since he mentioned this particular fact, he did not disclose a particular fact that the pigs were sold with some kind of defect, but he mentioned that pigs were being sold with all defaults. So with all kind of fault, there might be some kind of fault, so I am selling this. If you are willing to buy, then you can buy. As a result of it, when the purchaser bought those pigs, he already had few pigs, and that particular disease got transmitted to his own pigs, and as a result his pigs died. Here the seller will not be liable, because if he would have not made this particular statement that pigs are being sold with all defaults, then he would have been liable because he was concealing this particular fact. But since he has completely mentioned this particular fact, so if with all faults I'm selling, if you, it is deemed that there might be some or other fault, I'm not explicitly saying that there is typhoid fever, I'm just saying it is being sold, generally I'm saying that it is being sold with all faults. So if you are buying it, you are buying it at your own risk. So here seller will not be liable for fraud. Moving ahead with the next case, Eddington versus Fitzmaurice. In this particular case, here the directors of a company, they particularly actually they raised some amount of loan by issuing debentures. So here they get a lot of money that is subscribed by the people. They have issued debentures. That the purpose for issuing those debentures, I had mentioned that the money that will come from public investment, they will use that particular money for completing the buildings of the company, and as a result of the development of company's business, that will result into profit somehow the other day, and that will be a huge return to the people investing. That is what they have mentioned as in their purpose. However, the actual fact was that the money that they were getting, that was to be utilized for paying off the earlier liabilities that they had, the earlier liability that they were not able to pay from their own money. They were actually doing that. So here the directors were held liable for actually remaining silent and actually making a fraudulent statement, and with as a result of it, the people have subscribed, their people have invested their money, and they have, their money was not utilized for some, for the purpose that it was mentioned, and as a result they have suffered, they have not received any kind of return, they have suffered loss in a way. So in this case also, they were, the directors were liable for fraud. The second essential of this particular liability for misstatements under deceit or fraud, here the second essential says that knowledge about the falsity of the statement. So here, like I've already mentioned, the person, the defendant making the fraudulent statement, if he's trying to make a wrongful statement, so in that case he must be having the knowledge that he is making a false statement. Then only you are liable for fraud or deceit. If you're not having knowledge, then in that case you come under the second category, that is negligent, or you come under the third category, that is innocent misrepresentation. That will be determined further. However, if you have the knowledge about the fraudulent statement, then in that case you come under deceit or fraud. So here, there are these are certain ways by which you determine whether he had knowledge, and that has to be proved. First, either he knew that the statement is false, or he did not believe it in its truth. In both the ways, you are liable for this particular tort. He honestly believed that the statement that a statement is true, there can be no deceit. So if he honestly believed, then like I've already said, you will not come under this category. You will go under negligence, or you will go under innocent misrepresentation. Mere negligence in making a false statement will not make a person liable for deceit. So in order to come under deceit, you must have complete knowledge about the falsity of the statement and honestly believe in truth of the statement. So if you honestly believe that the statement is true, then also you will not come under deceit or fraud. Now coming into the famous case of fraud, that is Derry versus Speak. This is a famous case which you will study in even contract law. In this case, particularly the directors of a company, there was a the company was a tramway company. So tramway, as you remember, it is electric railways. So it is a company which worked for this particular matter. They have issued a prospectus. In this prospectus, it was clearly mentioned by the company that they are being given the power, they have been given the power by the board to use steam power instead of animal power. So earlier they were working on animal power. Now they are shifting to steam power that they have mentioned. As a result of shifting to another technology, you are well aware that that particular company will obviously gain more and more profits, and as a result people will be willing to invest in this particular company. Now this particular shifting from from animal power to steam power, the company requires a consent from the board of trade. Here the company members, the directors, have given their application for approval from the board of trade, but they have not received the approval, they have not received the consent of the board. Still they have mentioned in the prospectus that they have got the power and they have shifted to steam power. The board has not given them any kind of consent was yet to be given. But here directors honestly believed that the statement that they are making in the prospectus will be acted upon. That is, they will be some other day, in few matters of days, they will be given, they will be granted that particular consent certificate, and it is just a mere formality, and therefore they have asked for they have actually issued a prospectus and asked for investment of the people. However, later on it was found that the board of trade has refused to give them any kind of permission, And also as a result of it, since the consent was not given and the company went into liquidation, the company was wound up. So in this case, when the company went into winding up, so in this case the company was completely shut down, and the other creditors and all of them will be paid off. Whatever amount was due, that will be paid off, and the company is completely shut down. Here the plaintiff, who believed on the statement that was made in the prospectus, he acted upon that particular statement, and as a result of it filed for fraud that was caused. However, in this particular case, it was held by the House of Lords that the particular defendant will not be liable, that is the directors will not be liable for fraud. In fraud, you have to completely have knowledge about the falsity of the statements. Here, like I've already mentioned, that the directors, they honestly believed in the truth of the statement, that it is just a mere formality and they will automatically be granted, and therefore we are acting upon that particular statement. So since they honestly believed it in the statement, therefore they will not be liable for fraud in this particular case. So Lord Herschel has completely mentioned in this particular case, he said that in order to constitute fraud, it must be clearly established that that particular fraudulent statement you have made, either knowingly you knew that particular statement is false, or you did not believe in the truth of that particular statement. So in both the ways you are liable for fraud. Here the particular directors did not fall into any of the mentioned categories. Now, the third essential is intention to deceive the plaintiff. Like I've already mentioned, your knowledge as well as your intention both are required in this particular tort to be constituted. So the third, which is intention to deceive the plaintiff, here the defendant must make any kind of representation with an intention that the plaintiff should act upon it, and thereby by acting upon that misrepresentation, he, as a result of it, suffers loss. So in this case, I either knew, if I am suppose making a false statement to you, I have an intention that you will act upon my statement, or I have reason to believe that you will act upon my statement, and as a result, you and only you will act upon my statement and nobody else. So if I have a reason upon this, or I mean whatever fraudulent statement I am making, I have a reason, I have complete intention that it will be acted upon the other person. So if that particular person is acting upon my particular statement and suffers loss, so there was an intention present, and thereby I'll be liable for fraud. In this particular case, in this particular essential, it is however very important to understand that the statement when I am making, if I do not have an intention, that suppose I have two persons, like two different persons in front of me, I have made the statement to A, and I want, my intention is that only A should act upon it and not B, and by all reasons I know that B will not act upon it in any matter, in any cause, that B will not act upon my particular statement that I am making to A. So in that case, if at later point of stage, by all these grounds, if in case B acts upon it and suffers loss, then I will not be liable, because I had complete reasons to believe, and also I had no intention for the other person to act upon it. I only wanted A to act upon it, and I had reasons to believe that only A can do it, only A is capable to do that particular act. So in that case, if A acts upon it and suffers loss, then only I will be liable for this particular tort. I'll explain this with the help of these two important cases. That is, first is Langridge versus Levy, and second is Peake versus Gurney. Langridge versus Levy, in this particular case, the plaintiff is son of the father. Here there's a father, and the plaintiff who acted upon that particular statement is the son. So we'll first understand that there are three parties. First, gun seller, second is father, and third is son. Here now the defendant, that is the seller, he has sold the gun to father, and he has stated this particular statement that it is manufactured by a celebrated manufacturer. It has been manufactured by a person who if you have reason to believe, if you say that this painting has been made by this famous painter, so you have reason to believe that a particular quality and particular standard it belongs to. So in that case, like he has mentioned already, that that particular gun is manufactured by a celebrated manufacturer, and therefore it will be safe to use and there will be no defect. later point of time, actually he made the statement, the seller made the statement to the father. However, he here, the son acted upon that particular statement, that he was also present there. The gun, as a result of using that gun, the gun bursted, and as a result, the injury was caused to son, that is the plaintiff. The son, here it says that the son could successfully sue in fraud because the statement was which was made by the defendant was intended to be and was communicated to the plaintiff on which he had acted. So it was held that the even though the fraudulent statement that was made to the plaintiff's father, the statement that was of fraudulent nature was made only to the father here, but however again the son could successfully sue in tort in this particular fraud, because here the statement that was made by the seller was intended to be and was communicated to the plaintiff on which he had acted. Both of them were present, and it was obvious that if father is going to use it, it is intended that father's son would also have access to that particular gun, and he would also use that particular gun. But however it says that if there are certain circumstances, there are certain facts in which it means that other person will not act upon it, then you will not be liable. However, in this particular case, it was the person was held liable for that particular tort. The seller was liable to the son, that is. Then Peak versus Gurney, in this particular case, the defendants, that is the directors of the company, they have issued a prospectus, and they have while issuing the prospectus, they have mentioned certain statements wherein here the plaintiff relied on that particular statement that were mentioned in the prospectus, and he bought some of the shares of that particular company. And later on, he filed an action against the director of the company for making fraudulent statements in the prospectus. However, the statement that the company has mentioned on that particular prospectus is that it is the it could not, the prospectus said that it was only addressed to the first applicant for shares. So there was some kind of benefit that they were talking about in their prospectus, which will be given to the first applicant for shares. So this basically means that new applicants will not be given any kind of benefit that was mentioned in the prospectus. The other person acted upon it, he did not clearly understood that particular statement. That particular statement was only meant for original allottees, the original people who have been already allotted the shares, and not for the subsequent people who will purchase shares from the market. And therefore, in this case, the directors were not held liable for the particular false statements, if you are saying that that was a fraudulent statement. So that particular statement was not meant for the new allottees to act upon it. So if here, like I've already mentioned, here the son would have acted, could even act upon the statement, and he would have access to that particular gun, and he could also act on that particular statement. Here there was reason to believe by the directors that new allottees will not act upon it. So here you can escape the liability. The fourth important essential is that the plaintiff must be actually deceived, which means that if I've already mentioned that if I have made a fraudulent statement, and if you have acted upon it and suffered a loss as a result, then only I'll be liable. If I've just made a fraudulent statement, you have accepted that statement, but you have not acted upon it, you have not suffered any loss, you cannot make me liable as a result of that particular fraudulent statement. Now, in this particular case, Horsfall versus Thomas, here the plaintiff has again there is a case of gun selling. Here the gun was sold to the defendant after fraudulently plugging in a defect in it. So in this case, the plaintiff has sued the defendant for the price of the gun which he has sold by putting in some kind of defect in it. The defendant refused to pay on the ground that he had been defrauded. It was basically held in this particular case that there was no fraud in this case, because whenever there's a defect which you can determine, if you would have used it or operated it while purchasing, you would have easily determined that particular defect. If you are not let the buyer beware, if you have not availed your particular rights, you have not done your duty correctly, so in that case you cannot make the seller liable for each and every defect that is there. The defect that you can determine by your naked eyes, in that case the seller can remain silent actually. So here this particular case says that whenever the defendant, actually the person who bought that particular gun, that particular person never examined the gun. it is like possible for you to determine by mere operation. So in that case, if the it is basically sound in this particular case that you have every buyer must actually examine the particular good that they are purchasing. In this case, you cannot say that he was misled by the wrongful statement that was made by the seller. Now moving ahead with negligent misstatements, we have covered the liability for deceit or fraud. We will move ahead with negligent misstatements. So here it basically means that whenever defendant is making any statement, uh, when a particular person is making a deliberately false statement, and as a result of it you are suffering any loss by acting on my statement, then the other person will be liable for fraud or deceit. But now the second category that arises is that how far the defendant would be liable for a statement that is made honestly but negligently made by him. So, and as a result of it some harm has been caused to the other person. So how do you determine this kind of liability? Because I have made it honestly but I was negligent, there was absence of duty of care in order to determine whether it was a rightful or wrongful statement. So how do you determine the liability? So we have famous cases in it. First we will start with the first case. There are the you will find a lot of contradictory judgments. So I would request you to pay attention to what was held in each and every case and what is finally what we actually follow. The first case of 1888 is Can versus Wilson. In this particular case, here there was the defendants were valuers of property. So they actually value, they understand, they do survey, they understand the market price of the market condition, the development nearby, and thereby thereafter they value a particular property, that this particular property has maximum value of this much or minimum value of this much, and on that basis a particular person can sell or buy a particular property. So they have overvalued certain property. At that time they knew that the property was being valued for the purpose of mortgage. So values of property were actually approached that this particular property has to be given for mortgage purpose. So on that purpose the values of property actually explain what is actually the value of the property, and thereby you can give to the bank for attaching your property, and thereby you can get some kind of loan. So you must know the actual value of the properties. Here the values of the property, even after knowing that this was on mortgage, they have overvalued the property based on their valuation. On the basis of this valuation, the plaintiff granted loan to the owner of that particular property. That property was attached, and as a result the loan was given. Then after a few months the owner of the property, like you have to per month you have to give certain kind of interest and the amount, installment amount you pay off your loan. So in that case, in after 3-4 months the owner has defaulted in making the payment. Here the plaintiff later, at when the person defaulted, the plaintiff, the person who granted loan, actually found out that the actual value of the property was actually, the values of the property have overvalued the property, and actual value of the property was very less, and it was not sufficient to actually pay off the loan amount. So in that case he wanted to recover the amount from the valuers, the defendants, that they have given a fraudulent statement, and because of which I have acted upon it. However, in this particular case it was held that the defendants, that is the valuers of property, were liable in this case, because they have to take, whenever they have a duty to take care. Whenever you are making a statement, you have to see to it that you are making it rightfully or wrongfully. You have to use reasonable care in the preparation of the document. So in this particular case they were held liable for making a negligent misstatement. Like we have already discussed Derry versus Peak, wherein the tramway company was the directors of the tramway company were held liable, because here, but there in that case they have made the statement honestly believing it to be true. So in that case it was clearly mentioned that there could be no liability at all for a mere negligent misstatement. So this is in contradiction with the first case, Can versus Wilson, wherein the valuers were held liable. In Derry versus Peak 1889 case, it was held that for negligent misstatement you do not have any liability. The third case, that is 1893 case, Lee Lever versus Gold. In this particular case, it was held that the plaintiff actually has there was again a surveyor. The surveyor was named Gold. He has given a particular kind of certificate to the builder of the property. The plaintiff actually gave some kind of loan on mortgage on the basis of the value of the property, that the certificate which was given by Gold. He was a surveyor, he has valued a particular property, and on that basis again, like Can versus Wilson, he has given that particular certificate, and the other person has acted upon that particular certificate, given loan on the basis of mortgage. Here the plaintiff, later on they have found that he has again overvalued the property, sued for making false certificate. This is in contradiction to the Can versus Wilson case. However, the facts are quite similar. Here it has been said that there could be no action for mere negligence. Action can only lie in case of fraud, but not in case of mere negligence. They have upheld Derry versus Peak. This particular case, Lee Lever versus Gold, has upheld Derry versus Peak, and it is in contradiction with Can versus Wilson. The last case is of 1964, Hedley Bryan versus Heller and Partners. So in this particular case, the plaintiffs were advertising agents. They were given an instruction by the customer. The customer was Easy Power Limited. They have been instructed by the customer to obtain substantial advertisement contracts. So the customer has given suggestion to the advertising agents to obtain a lot of advertising contracts for the customer. So in order to get any contracts for the customer, the advertising agents must know the status of the customer, whether that customer will be able to pay off the advertising agents or not at later point of stage. So in order to know the credit worthiness of Easy Power, they requested their own bankers to ascertain the financial position of the customer, that is Easy Power, for the defendants, and then they will proceed with the finding of substantial advertisement contracts. Then they will proceed with the whole contract. The banks on inquiry found out that Easy Power is having 1 lakh pounds per year of trustworthiness, and defendants can easily rely on this particular statement, and it is a respectably constituted company considered good for its ordinary business engagement. This was the whole statement that was made by the bank. Again, that particular letter that was given to advertising agent, it also said, this is very important, that this particular letter is only for your private use. It cannot be used by anybody else, and also without responsibility on the part of the bank or its officials. So here they are completely waived off their liability, said that if you are relying on our statement and if you are acting and as a result you suffer loss, then we will not be responsible for any kind of loss that is suffered. So they are also waiving off their particular statement. Here the plaintiffs, by relying on that particular statement, went on into making advertising contracts on the behalf of their customers. Later on, it was found that the customer, Easy Power, has went into liquidation. It is a loss of around 17,000 pounds, and completely it is an insolvent body. So how will they recover their amount for the customer? The plaintiff sued the bank, that is on whose statement they relied upon. They have sued for negligent misstatement that was made, and as a result they have suffered the loss. Here Hedley Bryan versus Heller and Partners have reinstated Can versus Wilson and rejected Lee Lever versus Gold. They have stated that whenever any person is acting on your professional skill, wherein your complete job is to do correct valuation of property, and you cannot be negligent about these kind of acts. So in that case, you will be absolutely liable without responsibility on the part of you will be absolutely liable without any escape. However, in this particular case, it also says that whenever there is special kind of duty, special kind of professional skill which is required, in that case you will be absolutely liable. In that case, you cannot escape. However, in this particular case, since they have mentioned this particular fact that for your private use and without responsibility on the part of bank, so here they have escaped. If they would have not mentioned this particular fact, then they would be liable, like it was said in Can versus Wilson. So even for negligent misstatements, you will be held liable. So the main fact that we held finally in negligent misstatements is that whenever a special duty of care is required in negligent misstatements, and special skill is required, and if you default in that and some other person suffers loss because of the certificate or special skill that was required by you and some other person has suffered loss, then even in negligent misstatements you will be liable for making that particular misstatement. You cannot escape. However, if you make this kind of statements that without responsibility on the part of banker, then only you cannot be held liable. Otherwise, even in negligent misstatements you are held liable. The last category of liability for misstatement is innocent misrepresentations. So basically in this case, whenever you make a particular statement and it is considered, you are again you are making a false statement only, but it is neither you have an intention to deceive, so you do not fall in the first category. You're not making a fraudulent misstatement knowing it completely to be false. Also, you are not making that particular statement negligently, which means that there is no negligence. So here in this case, there is no liability for such a statement under law of torts, because in such case you neither fall in fraud, you neither fall in negligent misstatements. In England, however, there is separate act of Misrepresentation Act 1967. It says that some compensation will be given even for innocent false statements. In this particular act, it has said that if you have made a contract on the basis of the innocent misrepresentation and a contract has been made as a result, and that in that case other person suffered a particular loss by acting on your innocent misrepresentation, then it will turn into fraud. If I have made a innocent misrepresentation and there is no contract formulated on that particular innocent mischief, then I'll not be liable at all. It particularly clearly says whenever acting upon my innocent misrepresentation, a contract has been formulated with another person. So contract actually should be formulated, and as a result of making that particular contract, other person has suffered some kind of loss, then that particular innocent representation will be treated as fraud only. So again, it says that the act cannot not create any liability for a false statement if there is no contract, like I've already mentioned. So in this case also, the damages can be given for even innocent misrepresentations. Thank you.